3, 2, 1.
Whenever I read a screenplay and can't put it down, that's always a good sign. In Allied, it was beautifully written and very involving.
Steve Knight just came into my office and pitched me a really fun story.
You read the screenplay and you say, I hope I get to make this movie. It's just staggering.
By the third act, I said, let's do it. When I was 21 years old, this incredible story was told to me. A man, during the Second World War, he was in the SOE in France, behind enemy lines, and his liaison was a woman who was working for the French resistance, who became pregnant, and very unusually, he was allowed to bring her back to England. And one morning, after the baby had been born, he reports for work, and his superior officer said to him, we have absolute proof that your wife is working for the Germans and always has been. Here's a gun, you go back and you shoot her. And he did. It sent a shiver through me, and ever since I've thought, wow, this would make a great film.
Roll sound, please.
I have a fascination with war movies. World War II was a big part of my life, even though I was born way after it ended.
London was really on its knees. Nobody was sure how it was going to work out. Germany was ready to break the door down.
There were bombs falling out of the sky, constant air raid sirens. But instead of making people really afraid, it actually exhilarated everybody.
There was an organisation called the Special Operations Executive, or the SOE, who were responsible for actions behind enemy lines. It involved using locals, but it pretty much mostly depended on parachuting people in. Often they were sent knowing they were going to die, and they still went. So the story of the SOE in itself is remarkable, and this is one particular evocation of the people who carried out those operations.
A husband would offer his wife a cigarette before lighting his own.
I read this project many years ago. I love the characters and what they're going through, Marianne and Max, because they have to pretend they're a couple. They have to pretend they're very much in love, but at the same time hide their feelings because they're really in love. So that was a very interesting aspect of the story.
Like any films that I decide to do, it's always falling in love with the screenplay. Stevens has a great, way of writing scenes that are elegant and not obvious. Characters don't speak the plot. Plot is always an undercurrent that's happening, and I find that to be really intriguing.
This whole film is about who you are. What is your identity? Max immediately adopts a false identity and meets someone who is living under an assumed identity, which immediately means the first meeting is two people who don't exist. Max is one of those people whom half of him is switched off. And the same is true of Marianne. When they meet, of course, they switch each other back on, which is incredibly inconvenient.
What are you doing?
Testing you. The way you tested me.
He's an incredibly gifted writer. This script had certain details and research in it that really made it come to life.
X, I'm afraid this really isn't what you think it is.
V-Section is part of the British government that was overseeing all the spies and all the resistance, especially in Northern Europe during World War II.
This is going to be a standard blue dye procedure. So if the false information is among the batches sent from London, we shall know for sure.
A blue dye test is basically, if you suspect someone of passing information, you give them a piece of false information that only they have. And if that piece of false information appears on a communication, then that is proof that that person is the source of leaked information.
Did you send it?
I'm so sorry.
The story takes us to a place where you really test true love, and that trust is tested under the most extraordinary circumstances.
I need to know. Is this real?
I've loved you since Casablanca.
What I wanted to explore most of all in this film is it possible for two people to love each other even though one of them is betraying the other? Can that love be real, or is it made unreal by the actions that they carry out?
It's absolutely a story of betrayal. That's the universal theme of this film, and how we react when people who we are close to turn out to be, or we might not think, that they are who they say they are. And that, I think, is what's really great about this story.
Come with me to London. Come with me and be my wife.
I love you. I've loved you since Casablanca.
That was great. And cut.
For the style of movies that were made in the 40s, Marion Cotillard and Brad Pitt embody the tone and the feeling of pictures of yesteryear, which were wonderful epic dramas that contained wonderful truths in them about the human condition, but at the same time had grand spectacle.
Now, this is the part where I tell you I love you and leave you to count the stars, or whatever it is men do on their rooftops.
Marion Cotillard, I think she's one of the best we have in our business. So I was so glad when she read it and she loved it. And I think she said I was born to play this character. And it shows on screen. You can't take your eyes off her for 1 second. Her reactions, her playfulness, her sadness, she's put in a position where she has no choice than to do what she's doing. And she really, really loves her husband.
Max, let's forget the war. Let's make the best day ever.
I've done 3 films with Brad Pitt. What's great about being on a set with him is that he brings an incredible generosity and warmth and openness and humor to every situation. And he's all about encouraging creativity from those around him.
Except one of these, it's got to be like on the string, smooth.
Okay. Marion Cotillard, I mean, she's incredible. She's wonderfully Parisian and got this kind of dry sense of humor, consummate, extraordinary performer. And, you know, the two of them, when you come in, and it's great. We've been having quite a lot of time together, so it's nice. So there's a real sense of warmth and ease and generosity.
Action! Action! I need some help! Let's get some light over here!
C'est moi. This is really me.
I loved the story. I loved the fact that it's a very entertaining movie and at the same time a very deep, profound love story. And of course, when I heard that Bob Zemeckis was on board and Brad Pitt as well, it was even more exciting.
You've had a setback. I can't talk about it.
When it comes to a character who gets embroiled in a complicated situation, Brad Pitt can always deliver that because he's great at being able to portray characters who are in anguish and in pain and confused and trying to figure out what's going on. And he really rose to the occasion.
It feels dynamic to me.
Yeah, it's really good.
And it's like the world's spinning a little bit behind him.
Yeah, that's great.
Brad Pitt is an amazing actor. He's proved it so many times. And what was interesting with this movie was that for the 3 of us, Bob Zemeckis, Brad Pitt, and me, we're not used to tell big love stories like this one. So before we started shooting, we sat together with the producer and the writer, and we really had very deep discussion about the characters, about the story, so we got to know each other through this process of work and preparation for the movie. And that was great to have this time.
If we're dead tomorrow, no one would know.
From the beginning, there was fantastic screen chemistry between Brad and Marion.
Whatever that is that creates this chemistry on screen, they seem to have it. And you just issue a sigh of relief and go, God, it's working, like gangbusters. And you know what I think really helped is we really decided to try to shoot the movie in continuity. It was a very conscious choice that was actually asked for by Brad Pitt. So the first time that Marion comes on screen to work is when she meets Max for the first time. Then we take them into their apartment for the first time where they get to know each other and are slowly starting to fall in love with one another. And it grows up leading to the assassination where their love starts to blossom and then they come back into England. And so I think it actually allowed their love to grow on screen for the audience. And so the timing for filming worked perfectly. And it was really Brad who asked if this was possible. It's what he'd like to do. And so we did it.
Brad Pitt brings this kind of quiet confidence to the role that's really impressive. My first day shooting, we shot the wedding party scene, and Brad picks Marion up as we're throwing confetti on both of them, and I caught a glimpse of the two of them in the monitor of the camera, and it was like, oh, right, those are movie stars, proper movie stars. They're amazing. Watching them has been a very interesting experience for me.
Our year together in the house in Hampstead has been the happiest time of my life.
It's rare that you see a movie that has such a strong, compelling story and amazing characters and incredible relationship between the two characters. And amazing performances by Brad Pitt and Marion Cotillard.
Max, my love, you are my world.
It was an amazing time. That was very, very precious time.
I hope you will be able to forgive me. I love you with all my heart.
My cast was absolutely a magnificent and spot-on troupe of actors. Everyone who was in this movie understood their characters and performed in an inspired way.
It's been 3 fucking weeks.
Sir. It's been 3 fucking weeks, sir.
Heslop is played by Jared Harris, and he brings a great gravitas to what needs to be here when it's time for the story to be rooted in reality and giving the story a real foundation.
Marriages made in the field never work.
You're absolutely right, sir. You're invited to the wedding, by the way.
I enjoy a good old war story. It has that sort of appealing thing of it. This is a big scope movie, and those sets are fun to be on. The scale of them and what they're able to do.
Cut. That's good.
And yet, you still only get 3 takes and you're on your way, so.
Jared, that was great. Yeah, you inspired me there, so. Ooh.
It's pretty rare that you do more than that. That's because I nail it the first time.
The cast is incredible, and so just the idea of getting to be a part of this wonderfully written movie, it's like, yeah, sign me up.
To my formerly permafrosted brother. Thawed at last by love.
That's rather poetic.
I like that Bridget's a bit of a bohemian, and even though when you meet her, she's buttoned up and in her uniform, she really is a free spirit. There's something about this time in London during World War II where you would think people would be so frightened and cowering in their homes, but it was quite the opposite. They were really living life to the fullest and having all kinds of wild times, and I get to kind of play both of those things.
George?
Salute me, Frenchman.
Go to hell.
George is carefree and actually doesn't think that Max should have got married in the first place. I think he likes his friend to be a single guy so they could both go out and find women together.
I heard an unspeakable rumor about you being in love.
No.
In a film that's tension, it's nice to sometimes get a second to breathe, and that's what Daniel brings to the table.
Oh, gotta go, George. Buy me a drink later.
Max, you appear to be walking on air. It's revolting.
He has a warmth, a humour, and living with the Blitz and going, at any moment a bomb could drop on us. I'm going to party like hell. I'm going to take as many illicit substances as possible.
Max, this is splendid.
So in every blooming scene, he turns up with another darling on his arm, you know. But he's not a malicious person, you know. It's just, as he says, it's life lived in the exquisite moment of death.
My beautiful girlfriend is played by Charlotte Hope. She's a few years younger than I am, and so I feel a little lecherous, but I kind of like it. And we just kiss each other for hours a day.
Me and my mates would really like to see you two ladies kiss each other.
I spend pretty much every scene kissing or fondling. But I think it's quite exciting that they get to be that intimate with each other in public. I think that's probably quite a thrill to them in itself. But I think ultimately they're two people that have found each other in the chaos and love each other very much.
being on set was amazing. Everybody is really mellow, laid back. We finish the day at a reasonable hour. Zemeckis creates an atmosphere on the set that is exactly by design to keep everybody happy. I guess it's one of the perks of working for somebody who's been doing it for so long.
Throughout the set, you just get the best out of everybody because they love coming to work. That kind of a set where creativity is allowed to happen and people can do their jobs, it's wonderful to be around the fluidity of it, the ease of it.
Sorry, go ahead.
First day on a job, let alone a job with Brad Pitt and Marion Cotillard. I'm as nervous as I was my first job out of drama school. Are they thinking they've made a mistake? How am I going to do? I've only got 2 lines, 3 lines. And as I approach Bob, he's holding out his hand and says, "Congratulations." And apparently he'd heard that morning that I'd been nominated for a BAFTA, which was fantastic because I didn't know. But it was just so great because at that moment, I relaxed. And Bob said, "Oh, wow, that's great, Anton. That's so cool." And Marion said, "What's that? What's that?" And it was just perfect, absolutely. I couldn't have designed it better.
Everybody did a fantastic job. Everyone brought, immense amount of energy and emotion to everything that they were playing.
It's always the people. It's a joy to be working with people who are so super professional about what they do and at the same time, decent human beings because life's short.
For most filmmakers, there's an immediate need to be in the real place. I need to be on location. I need to be in Morocco. And Bob is very quick to abandon any need to be in some specific location filled with logistical obstacles and everything else.
We obviously don't have a shoot to gather, so that's not going to be, so that's going to be.
So he really can go after the essential content of a scene and the dramatic significance of a scene without allowing things, rain, sun, weather, to get in the way and to limit that.
Well, I always look at production design as a character in the piece. It has its own emotion. The movie is a romance at its core, so the production design was always done with an eye toward it being romantic.
Maintenant que tu es là, je vais te présenter à tout le monde.
It's also completely accurate to the period, and it evokes this emotional feeling. When your production design can do that, the audience isn't aware of it, but they can feel it. And that, I think, is what's really great about having a really competent production designer like Gary Freeman on this film.
Do we want to do anything with her? That's a little dressed.
When we met him the first time via Skype, he had done some artwork and presented other artwork that he said was inspiring his way of thinking, having read the screenplay. He was showing us the way he saw the movie. And right away, Bob was responding to Gary. It was just like they were in the same room, and Gary would show an image, and then Bob would say, "Yeah, and then we should do that." And he'd say, "Now, don't you like the way this window looks like down this street and the way they boarded it up and it used to be?" And then Bob would say, "Yeah," and then you could see the two of them were building on each other's ideas, and it was almost like hang the phone up, call Gary and say, "I want him on the movie." It was just like that. But not only did Gary, first and foremost, bring an artistic sensibility that was exactly right for the movie and exactly right to pair with Bob. He is incredibly savvy and smart designer, where he's made sets serve dual purposes over and over again. It was staggering.
Il est 8h32. On a 3 minutes avant la diversion.
We have, 78 sets or something on this. So what I tried to do is combine as much as possible so that when we build a set, we build a big set. The Rivoli set became Hobar's office, which then became the German embassy. Marianne's apartment becomes the Ampha Cafe. So every single set has like 2 or 3 sets built over it.
It's a very sweeping, large, epic, romantic feel to the beginning of the movie. So when we start the film in Casablanca, we wanted it to evoke the Casablanca that we know from the movie Casablanca. So we wanted it to feel like what it really was in the French Riviera in Africa.
Well, we enjoyed the Rivoli as the opening of the movie, so it gave it a real sort of scope and scale. So the Rivoli is a very glamorous night spot where all the Vichy go and the Germans and the diplomats, and we wanted to sort of just really turbo up the glamour of it. You know, marble and gold and chrome and huge chandeliers and beautiful people smoking gauloise. We created like a tapestry which was very much sort of jazz deco influenced, and we had a huge beautiful chandelier made for us, which I've not really seen anything like that before, particularly deco. It was a very nice set to do.
Nous sommes prêts à faire demi-tour et là un petit monsieur très mal habillé sort et nous dit « Monsieur et Madame Verne !» Devant mon air dépité, Maurice me dit « Tu sais ma chérie ».
Your set design falls into your set decoration, the way the props are incorporated, the way you shoot, everything falls behind it. So as soon as that scale works, the whole movie follows the same scale.
The neighbors will find it curious if I don't come to visit you on your first night.
The rooftop set was kind of east meets west, so it's on the edge of a sort of swanky neighborhood because we have to see certain characters in windows to establish the plot lines. But it's kind of moving towards the harbor and it's becoming a bit souk-like.
Kiss me.
It's pretty much all night, so it was a no-brainer that we build it on the stage. There's a lot of emotional acting, and again, Bob wanted total control of the light, and he didn't want a gale whipping through, and he didn't want the call to prayer going through every single shot, you know. So that's kind of what we did, really. And then we just made an area for Brad to sit and kind of contemplate. So the whole thing was on a 4-foot riser, and then we wrapped it in blue because, again, you know, one direction we need to see downtown and the minarets, and then you turn to the right and you'll see the harbour and the water. Because that's something that we really wanted to get across, that you feel it's very much, it's like a Mediterranean seaside city rather than a sort of deep African city.
Bonjour.
Deux cafés, s'il vous plaît.
I do a lot of the paintings myself, so I do the kind of master shot of what the set looks like. And I will literally say, we are building this section here. It's mainly where the actors are, because the actors tend to enjoy a physical environment to interact with. And also the background, so that our horses and their cattle, for instance, are not walking on a blue floor because the shadows are good and all those sorts of things.
Merci. Bonjour.
Tu sembles avoir tout Vichy sous ton charme, merde.
The set design was very, very impressive. They had a lot to do. There's a market and a cafe in Casablanca, and I was so impressed to see all the details. Even the smells were really amazing, and we really believed, even though we were inside, that we were outside in a street of Casablanca.
There's a camel walking through, and that's the reality of what you're seeing on the set. And then, of course, when you see the movie, that green screen element is this beautiful element that you feel is a complete blend between the reality that you're looking at and the post-production wizardry that's blended together. And it's a perfect blend in a very realistic, very powerful, and very intimate story about two people.
I heard an unspeakable rumor about you being in love.
Oh, gotta go, George.
Certain period settings, like the SOE office, they found a dilapidated section of this old factory and refitted it. And you have this very idiosyncratic set that exists on different levels with different beams coming through, and it kind of resembles Churchill's war room.
We put a few sort of fibre boards up and created some passageways, and it gave us huge scope. We could have Heslop's office overlooking a pool with all the secretaries and machinations of war.
They said you had news.
Yes, I have news, Wing Commander, regarding Marianne Beausejour.
Full of life and people and costume and excitement and, you know, the thrill of the war effort. Whereas in the V section offices, we kind of took it down, so it really was Churchill's bunker-like, which is just it's like a subterranean, dark, airless environment, intimidating and much more menacing.
We wanted the interior of the cottage to look absolutely correct for the period, and the thing that was true about the way people lived in wartime London is that houses were really, really small. They were very compact. Rooms were really tiny. And so that created a lot of very interesting challenges, considering that there's a scene in the movie where they have a party with about 100 people.
Marianne! Wonderful party! Brilliant!
Getting enough to drink?
Very funny old man.
What's interesting is we've got some quite big sets that are big scale, and there's a lot of air between the camera and the walls. But sets like Rose Tree Cottage, the camera's never more than 6 foot at any time away from anything of any detail. So in a way, they're actually more difficult and more complicated because you have to put so much more detail in it. But also, when you're doing someone's home, it really has to feel like it belongs and it needs history. So, you know, you paint it once and you'll paint it again, because we've all painted our homes. And then you pull off the paint, there's 4 or 5 different colors. So it's making sure it feels real.
This film feels like an old-time classic movie, and it could only feel that way if the integration of the visuals with the practical production design was completely emotionally seamless.
Gary Friedman did a fantastic job, and it's putting him with Bob and really building this film out of nothing and then creating that atmosphere and this world in such a way that an audience sees these sets and, wow, this is old-fashioned movie making.
I keep the emotions real. That's why it works.
Bob Zemeckis walked into my office one day and said, "I love your Steve Knight screenplay. I'd love to direct this film." And I'd never met him before, and it's Bob Zemeckis. I'm like, okay, let's start talking. I remember he said 3 or 4 lines about the script, and I said, "So tell me about Castaway and Forrest Gump and Back to the Future," and just wanted to ask him so many questions about his body of work.
And then you guys walk out between the camera and the dance floor, right through there, heading toward that ladder. Okay?
Okay.
Good. All right, here we go.
I was so honored that he really gravitated to this film, and I had heard through his people that he always had a passion to do a World War II picture.
Qu'est-ce que vous faites? Pourquoi vous avez éteint le moteur?
Oui, pour de la marre.
Robert Zemeckis is a visionary director. He's done so many special movies that only he could do. When we first talked, he said, "It's the first time I'm gonna really dive into this love story. I've never done this before."
And action!
Bien joué.
C'est parce qu'ils savent que je suis amoureuse de toi.
So to see him work and to watch him creating the atmosphere of the movie is very exciting.
En cours de l'année écoulée.
For Bob, storytelling is paramount. And so he wants to create an opportunity where he can tell that story and include information and details and drama that, in the most efficient way, inform us about who is Max Vatan, who is Marianne Beausejour. When they get back to London, what is the significance of their life together? He's very attentive to shooting the picture, employing a visual language that is the point of view of the character who's defining the dramatic moment.
The thing I love about making movies more than anything is to move audiences emotionally. And when you have a story that's as powerful as this one, you have a great opportunity to be able to do that. The camera is also an emotional thing. It's very important. I had long conversations with Don Burgess, my director of photography. And we talked about how we had to use the camera and lenses and everything to evoke as much emotion as we possibly could.
Bob's very exciting to work with, and I think we've made like 10 films together now. He's a very visual director, so we start right in on what the look of the movie is going to be and how the camera can help tell that story. The discussions are all about the point of view that Bob takes in a particular scene. A lot of times it's driven by a particular character in the scene. You want the audience to be connected to that character. So we try to use the camera to keep the audience, in essence, feeling what the character is feeling, in the same positions of the character, seeing what the character is seeing, and then tying it together in a cinematic way.
Broken glass. Yes, sir. Has to come out to at least about here, I think. Okay. Then we'll dress all the stuff in on the other side. And we got a straight line for going. You see an opening in the sandbags and all that there.
He designed his shots very early on, especially the set pieces. The way he's going to start a scene and he'll focus on something and pull that camera back, and then you see our characters with a lot of extras and a lot of other things happening within the scene. He'll focus on those characters, but he'll show the audience the scope of the film.
The most specific thing that we did is, as the events in the story start to close in on our characters, we wanted to evoke a feeling of claustrophobia. So we laid out the movie so that the lenses that we were using were getting longer and longer. Of course, this is very subtle and very subconscious, but the audience will feel the idea that the images are becoming more and more claustrophobic as the film goes on.
I've worked with Bob for 30 years now, and he always surprises me. And that's always the sheer joy of working with him. He's always willing, as an artist and as a filmmaker, to take huge creative risks. It's a romantic drama that plays out inside most of these set pieces.
Bob wanted to keep it very much within Max and Marianne's point of view, to immerse yourself in it rather than be a sort of casual observer. It's kind of laying down a path, really, so that the audience sort of navigates themselves through the movie. It's very interesting looking at it in that way, that you're not just building a 360-degree set just so it's there. The angle on the set means something.
Background action and action.
I need some help! Let's get some light over here!
Bob Zemeckis really creates something very, very special. He was creating this super big set, and at the same time, it was creating this intimacy. And I thought that the mix of wideness was a very good idea to tell the story.
If they're offering you some kind of suicide mission, you can say no to them. You know that.
I have anything on.
What's happened, Max?
They're running a blue dye on Marianne.
Robert Zemeckis, he's a legend, certainly, in my mind. He's such a warm, kind guy, but he also happens to be such a master. He knows what he's doing, and everybody benefits from that.
Bob and I have worked together for about 10 years now. He's amazing at giving us exactly what it is that we need to do our jobs. And that's the thing that makes Bob really special. He's famous for his use of visual effects. He's been doing it for a really, really long time. And he's not scared of what isn't there because he trusts that it will be awesome at the end of the day.
The neighbors will find it curious if I don't come to visit you on your first night.
He does absolutely let you take the lead, and that gave me the confidence and the strength to then go forward with the designs.
He's also able to communicate his ideas so that everybody understands what he's doing. Most of the time, everybody's in the forest, and he's got to provide the leadership and say it's not that complicated. But he's dealing with like a 220 cinematic IQ, and the rest of us, even if we're really good, are laboring around 140, but he's still got those 80 points, you know? So he's a genius at this.
Only thing in London not rationed, champagne.
Everything looks incredible. Everybody looks impeccably dressed. Their hair looks great. This crew's amazing. Everybody's operating on the highest level.
That's why I'm still
I mean, so few people can claim that they've made perfect movies, and Bob Zemeckis absolutely can.
Doing period movies are fun because it's something that movies do better than any other art form. They can transport you to another time, and it takes a screenplay, it takes a cast, and all the departments and all the craftspeople who work on a movie to be able to give the directors the tools that he needs to be able to accomplish that. And I had that on Ally.
Once in a while, you get these stories where the production designer, the costume designer, everybody just comes together and says, yes, we want to make this. This is why we're in this business. It's because we're starting from scratch.
Bob actually called me and said, I'm doing something which is completely out of my normal playing field. So I read it on an airplane and just couldn't put it down. It just totally grabbed me. And I started visualizing it.
Joanna Johnston, she's one of the most brilliant costume designers ever. She's worked with me on many of my films ever since Roger Rabbit. Her costumes were absolutely perfect and beautiful and exactly right.
She's been working with Bob for so many years. They know each other perfectly well. She knows his vision of a woman and his idea of a glamorous look.
I was very sure about how I wanted it from the outside. I had quite a clear design drive to it. I had the ideas very well formed early on. Sort of glamorous piece, and in that sort of old-fashioned Hollywood style of glamour, but with a modernity to it. And it's definitely sexy with Marion and Brad. That combination, it's quite electric. So we start in our story in North Africa, as you know. Max has been given a drop of a suitcase, and in the suitcase is a perfectly constructed, elegant tropical suit and all necessary accessories. He wears that to go to the Rivoli to meet Marianne. Everybody's dressed up, everybody looks super chic. It's a European flavor. It was Brad's idea to have it all very pale, which was completely perfect. So we just did it in a pale Irish linen, but made it very comfortable and sharp. You know, I wanted a little bit of flourish, so he's got a striped cotton shirt and he's got a tie, and this tie actually we modelled on an original 40s tie that Mr. Pitt liked very much.
Ta femme va porter une robe violette. Cherchez le colibri.
There was quite a lot of discussion with Bob and myself about what we could do for instruction to Max for identifying Marianne. And in the end, we came up with this idea that Marianne had a little matador cape, and it was hanging over the back of her chair inside out. We painted a hummingbird, the beautiful flower that the hummingbird is flying into. Marion actually had the idea of a hummingbird because she had heard about a spy who went under a pseudonym as Hummingbird, and then had the idea of the hibiscus flowers and the hummingbird coming into the flower. So it's a sort of deep meaning leading towards our story. I knew that we were starting on her back. These were the beginnings of the ideas of the open back. I actually slightly shifted from that. I made a fastening across here and then made the back wider so it became more structured. So basically it's this beautiful silk with this shimmer and then with this very strong kick of colour underneath, which gives it more life under cameras. Rooftop night for Marianne, I wanted her to be sexy, but I also wanted her to have air in her costumes. Actually, these pajamas became a night dress. It's got this incredible vibrancy, this print of blues, oranges and yellows on this sort of slightly peachy base. It's printed on this shantung silk, so I wanted something very lightweight that would blow in the breeze. The idea was when they're on the rooftop that you feel the wind in it. That's their first evening together. She's playing her hand well, I would say.
Now, this is the part where I tell you I love you. And leave you to count the stars, or whatever it is men do on their rooftops.
On the rooftop, for Max, it's the sort of residual of Brad's costume in the suitcase. So it's the trousers, the beautiful nubuck suede shoes, and braces and a shirt. So it's kind of sexy, casual, looking good.
But you like expensive clothes? And your shoes are always polished.
He has had some extremely well-tailored suits which have been magically put into her apartment.
You look okay. Let's go.
So for the Amphir Cafe, he wears a three-piece tropical weight fine wool suit. Just very, very elegant, and it's very cool pearl grey colour.
Okay, sorry.
For Marianne, I did an incredibly complex print, which was this geometric skirt. It's a patterned skirt and a plain top. It's a sort of like a shirt dress, but it's kind of chic. She tops it with a natural pedal straw hat. I wanted her to wear a hat because I liked the framing of it, and I was very inspired by Betty Davis and Now Voyager. We've got a seam here underneath the belt, but this is all continuously cut. So this print got laid in onto the cloth. Out of this geometric pattern, we created a secondary pattern out of the pleats. So the diamonds became different diamonds.
Tu es magnifique.
The evening dress sequence for the German embassy, the smartest look that we did in the film, it had this sort of distinctive detail, which is actually feathers on her left shoulder and her right hip. In fact, I started with a leaf design and I ended up with a feather design. I wanted it in satin because I wanted it to have this liquid quality to it. So this colour is between sort of an eau de Nil and what I call a soft seafoam green. This is got the volume in the front of the skirt, and so when she's static, it hangs like a column, like a goddess.
Come with me to London. Come with me and be my wife.
So colours in London, checks and prints, kind of going into a little bit more of an English look with a French nod. And this coat constructed out of a wool, which I loved, this blurred check. That was a sort of subliminal thing in the story, blurred lines. I felt that it was, you know, appropriate for spies.
So it's in the cards. We get our chance to make history. Of course, you have to work and to be very accurate, to work on the global look, the costumes and the hair and the makeup. Bob wanted something very glamorous, so we sat together and we looked at images of many actresses of this era, and that was a lot of fun because, first of all, they were beautiful, and the work on the hair and makeup at that time was very strong.
Daniel Phillips, who did the hair and makeup, we worked very closely. You've got to be hand in hand. Hats and necklines and all of that needs to be harmonious for sure.
In order to get a look for a movie, firstly, I read the script and then I have various ideas, but I'm very much led by the costume designer because whatever I come up with, it has to obviously fit in with whatever her designs are.
The styling works really nicely for today. It's chic and it's elegant.
It was really, really beautiful to watch them work together. You get inspired by this very special feeling that you were in the 40s, but at the same time, there's this spirit of modernity.
She did such a beautiful job beyond my expectations. She completely understood how to evoke that romantic feel that the period provides, and of course that the characters are portraying in their performance.
I always love it when it all comes together. It was a great team, and I love working with Bob. What else could you want in a film?
Tu es magnifique.
Tu m'as déjà dit ça.
The thing that was really important for this movie was that we wanted to evoke the period atmosphere, you know, cars and people. It's kind of a movie spectacle. It can transport you to another time, and so that's always fun to do.
The vehicles, oddly enough, even if people aren't into them, it's one of the easiest ways to recognise what era we're filming in. So, from that point of view, we need to get it right.
The main cars belong to Max's character. The Citroen that's left for him in Casablanca was a crucial car because it had to evoke the glamour and the style. Everything had to be right for him when he's either driving it or standing next to it.
Don't slow down. This is how you drive in Casablanca.
The scenes set in Casablanca have a very different feel to the vehicles. It's a certain style and look. We've got civilian vehicles. Certain market square scenes would be everyday usable vehicles. And then we've got some big scenes which we have some very beautiful, very attractive, high-end cars. Well, it's wartime, so we have a lot of military vehicles. We've done a lot of military-based stuff, in particular RAF.
We had the Humber, that was the staff car Max has as an officer, and that's just a very traditional English sedan modified by the Army. And that car had to have a lot of production work done to it because the giant climax of the movie takes place where the Marianne character is inside the car. The audience sees the scene from her point of view. So that car had to accommodate massive production logistics. We had to get the cameras everywhere. So it was a very standard and perfect car for the character, but then it had to accommodate all these production issues that we had for the scenes that we were portraying.
We went up to a military base. They've got an existing Lysander, and obviously we went and looked at that and said, you know, can we borrow your plane? They said, sure, you can take it out. Of course, then we say, oh, but at the end of the movie, it rains for the entire sequence. You know, we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of gallons of water. Well, of course, this is an original 1943 aeroplane. There's no way on earth they're going to let you do anything to it. So we discovered a company down in Cornwall, actually, that do reproduction, and they pretty much built it from spec. They literally went to the original aeroplane and copied it. I think if you put an engine in it, it would fly. It's that well made.
All of this was an interesting challenge. It's 1930s vehicles that we're now filming here in 2016. So at the end of the day, be able to look back and say it's gone well.
How come you don't know Sten's?
I do know Sten's.
I grew up watching movies about World War II, and what I had seen in movies of the era were these machines of war that you always saw.
On Allied, we started with a huge selection of weapons that we could use for this period, the 1940, 41, up to 44 period. We condensed it down to the most popular and the most recognizable weapons at the time. Every gun we use, apart from usually in a stunt, where the gun is dropped or somebody's hit, are real. We restrict them to fire only blanks. The Sten gun, it's such an iconic gun and it's so historic that I'm surprised it hasn't been featured before as much as it is in this. The Sten guns that we're using are about 50 to 60 years old. It's a very simple design, basically just a tube with a bolt inside it. This started off as a generic Mark II Sten, and we've extended the barrel on it, and we've increased the size of the ventilated handguard on it, basically for ease of movement, and it looks better on camera. For German officers, we have the P08 Luger 9mm, which is also an iconic gun. The 9mm Luger round fits perfectly into the 7.65 Walther PPK, which was a Gestapo and a detective gun. The British Army ended up with these, which are the P14s, which they had from 1940 onwards. This is Max's service revolver, which is the Mark IV Webley & Scott revolver, which is a .38. Very easy gun to operate. The armor in the movie, basically, we have to make sure all the guns are safe and working. We train the actors in the safe use and to look like they know what they're doing. Marianne, I don't think she'd ever fired anything like this before, and so I did about 4 or 5 hours training in the morning, and she was confident by the end of that. Brad was very good. I got him to fire the gun, empty it, clear it, change the magazine, cock it, fire it again, while he's moving, looking at different targets. And he picked it up very quickly. When we did the day at the embassy, they had a huge, big table which was dressed with trays, champagne glasses, bottles, and the guns were preset underneath. So when Brad lifts the table up, throws it forward, they're then able to just take the gun straight out. Then they have to physically cock the weapons and then start firing. There's so many factors play into those scenes. Both him and Marianne were very competent because of the initial training we did.
That was great to have this time, you know, preparing, because it was really important that you believe that we were actually shooting. So they did a really amazing job.
To me as an armor, they look good in the role when they're actually firing the Stens and moving around. They both did very, very well.
Being good at this kind of work is not very beautiful.
Yeah, I like that.
If we're dead tomorrow, no one would know.
Visual effects are at a point now where you can do absolutely anything. Things are not what they seem to be.
Action!
Qu'est-ce que vous foutez? Pourquoi vous avez éteint le moteur?
Robert Zemeckis is one of the great filmmakers to have worked in our medium in the history of cinema. He is a cinematic genius in terms of how he is able to visualize a movie and put on screen what he's actually visualizing. It's like an exquisite ballet between intimate storytelling and epic scope.
Bob is a believer in the virtues of visual effects and is happy to incorporate those things onto a controlled environment where the logistical difficulties do not come between him and the performers.
When you have to do a movie that's a period movie and you have to create parts of the city that are destroyed by bombing, you can do it in a way that you don't obviously have to build everything. So we use visual effects to very effectively create a scope of the film that couldn't exist.
We create the illusion that it's 1944 in the middle of the war, and so we've used a lot of visual techniques to kind of make that happen. We're using a combination of practical and stage locations, a lot of blue screen to create backgrounds, to create what's going on, and make sure all of those elements are telling the story.
The movie opens with Brad Pitt's character parachuting down into a vast desert. And there are so many things that were kind of working against us in trying to do it physically that we decided we had to take a digital approach to it.
Visual effects allowed us to create this shot that would be impossible to do practically under any circumstance. So we basically just shot Brad on the stage and designed a camera move, and then we digitally paint the desert in around him.
For the environment around him, we actually went down to Morocco to essentially do a big 3D scan of a portion of the Sahara Desert. So we will be able to extend this small sand dune set piece to look like the vast Sahara Desert.
We have a shot where Brad walks down this war-torn street. We shot in the parking lot of the studio and just put up a couple of building facades and had period cars and people walking around.
When a building was bombed in London, the street was almost cleaned up the next day. So it's kind of this weird look of bomb wreckage and piles of rubble, but then clean streets that cars can still drive down.
We wanted to be inside the destruction rather than being a casual observer of the destruction. So hence, we're very close to the glass, we see the shards, and then we then see a huge visual extension of Blitz London and the aftermath, or the day after the bombings.
We see a bombed out store corner and a double-decker bus. All the buildings around, all the skylines, and a lot of the distant cars and even people are all digital.
Bob had designed this shot in about half an hour.
Hendon Airfield. This was a real airfield that existed outside of London and flew Halifax bombers and Lysanders and a variety of other aircraft. We basically could afford to build one of the aircraft that Max flies, the Lysander, and every other aircraft had to be digitally built. We had an actual airstrip called RAF Halton, and we had to create the entire world from scratch with more hangars, hundreds of airplanes, and various pieces of moving machinery that look accurate to the period down to the bolt and nut on the plane. So we have to create the entire world from scratch, expanding it to fill this void.
What we wanted to do is have this kind of blend of war always sort of there, always in the background, if you will. Sometimes it's in the foreground. You could die any moment. A bomb could fall on your house. So there was this kind of fatalistic quality.
In the film, the anti-aircraft fire hits a German bomber. Its trajectory quickly changes and starts heading right for us. So we mix digital work to create the world around them and all the mayhem. But as that plane gets close, we really want to sell the look of the fire, and especially when it hits the ground, the explosion that it makes. We'd film half-scale elements of this engine on fire and then a real aviation fuel bomb going off, the explosion when it hits the ground, and augment that all with digital explosion work as well. There's a really cool mix of sort of large-scale special effects with digital enhancement.
All right, check the machine, please.
Another example of that is that when you read the scene of the birth of their child in the Royal Free Hospital, it's quite a daunting thing to read on the page. You enter a hospital, bombs are dropping, walls are coming down, windows shattering. They're rushed out of the hospital into the Blitz. But it's all done in a safe environment with our actors. Ultimately, we want our visual effects to help create a moment that is rich with information and significance for the storytelling.
Anna, c'est toi.
Casablanca was very stylish and had all that sophistication that you would have found on the French Riviera in the era. So we used all of the tools at our disposal to create Morocco and the Canary Islands. No one could afford to build what we actually have portrayed in the movie if we weren't able to use the digital tools that we have to create it. The actual exterior of the club is a digital painting. It doesn't even exist.
So big digital environment scene like Marianne's rooftop in Morocco, we actually went down to Morocco and laser scanned rooftops in the Medina and Tangier, which is like just this amazing sort of old feel like Casablanca would have in the 1940s. And then we take thousands of photographs of what those real buildings look like. So it starts from an idea that's purely conceptual, and then we get to go through and find the combination of different environments that will give us that classic tone to it.
Heard a lot about you around the circuit.
I've heard a lot about you. Keep going straight. I'll tell you when to turn.
The act of shooting car interiors on stage has been around for the better part of 100 years. And now what we're doing here is we're using a 100-foot long by 8.5-foot high concert-style wall of LED panels with millions of little LEDs in them, all of that emit light.
We go out and shoot the plates and then actually run the plates in real time when we're shooting the scene inside the car. So you actually have these magnificent reflections of buildings and other cars reflected in the surfaces of the car, and it gives it a really realistic feeling, and you don't have to then spend the money and try to paint that in digitally afterwards.
That was really amazing to be in that car in a studio surrounded by Moroccan streets. That really helped us to believe that we were actually rolling in this country when we were in the middle of London in a studio.
I keep the emotions real. That's why it works.
We want to be able to trick people into thinking that everything around them is real at all times. In a way, the ultimate success is if we do our job so well, nobody will even know it was a visual effects film. But there's over 700 visual effects shots in the movie intended to be invisible at the end of the day.
It's really a wonderful situation I had on Allied. When you have every department say, we're all making the same movie, my entire crew was inspired. I mean, everybody did a fantastic job.
Thank you.